Tonight, we journey into the story of India. You picture the land as it once was, wide rivers curling through fertile plains, monsoon clouds swelling and breaking, and the slow hum of life gathering around water. The Indus and the Ganges roll like great serpents, carrying silt that nourishes crops, but also carrying myths that will feed generations of minds. You might hear frogs croaking in the floodplains, see reeds bending with the current, or smell the smoke of the first cooking fires rising at dawn. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you can, share your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk alongside the first settlers, people who learned to coax crops from soil, who tamed barley and wheat, who watched rivers flood and retreat and left behind pottery that still survives. Their huts cluster together, perhaps more for comfort than for strategy. At night, you imagine them listening to the same insects you hear now in your room, crickets threading silence into music. One gentle aside, you might struggle to endure what they once lived through, depending on the rains to survive each season. A little too much water and the fields drown, too little and the harvest withers. Yet still, they stay, trusting the earth. Slowly, villages grow into towns. Clay bricks are pressed into shape and stacked in neat lines, and fires and kilns harden them into permanence. Children trace patterns in wet earth, while elders carve symbols on seals, mysterious little marks of animals, fish, and abstract lines. Historians still wonder whether these signs were words, prayers, or the earliest records of trade. You, too, bend closer, trying to imagine their meaning. At the heart of this life is the river. It gives fish to eat, water to drink, and clay for pots. Yet it also swells with danger, a reminder that nature is master. When storms sweep across the horizon, the villagers may chant for mercy, stacking offerings on simple altars. Perhaps they whisper to a horned god, or to a mother goddess holding fertility in her hands. One key fact stands firm. By around 3000 BCE, these settlements along the Indus had become some of the earliest urban societies in the world. While Mesopotamia raised ziggurats and Egypt lifted pyramids, here too, humanity experimented with order. The villages of Mehrgar and others became stepping stones toward something grander. You sit with a family in the cool shade of their mud brick home. The air smells of grain and smoke, and the evening light flickers as a fire dances. Someone plucks a stringed instrument, perhaps a primitive lute, while another beats a simple drum. Even now, you sense India's long tradition of rhythm and melody beginning its endless song. A soft joke slips in. You wonder if the neighbors complained about the noise back then too, tapping on the walls of clay like apartment dwellers today. But beneath this everyday peace, larger forces stir. The rivers shift their courses over centuries. Some settlements are abandoned, swallowed by the earth or left to crumble in silence. Historians still debate why. Was it climate change? Did drought dry up once mighty streams? Or did invaders arrive, pressing their own culture into the soil? The answers are uncertain, wrapped in time's fog. Yet for now, as you stand in that distant evening, what matters is the simplicity. A mother teaches her child to grind grain between two stones. A man checks his fishing nets in the river shallows. A trader loads beads, shells, and bright stones to carry along the dusty path to another village. Each act is small, but each act lays a brick in the great foundation of India's story. You watch the sun sink, painting the sky over the Indus in gold and rose. Shadows lengthen across the fields, and the villagers retreat to their homes, their laughter fading as darkness grows. Firelight flickers from doorways, little stars dotting the earth. Somewhere, an elder chants words you cannot understand, but the cadence feels familiar, an old heartbeat that will echo down through centuries. And as the night deepens, you realize you are at the beginning. The beginning of a civilization, of stories, of ideas that will one day shape the world. The river flows, constant and eternal, carrying you forward toward Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and the great puzzle of their vanished people. You drift onward along the Indus, and suddenly the villages you saw before seem small, almost fragile compared to what rises ahead. Broad avenues stretch before you, laid out like the careful lines of a board game. The streets are straight, their angles precise, as though someone long ago had taken a ruler and pressed geometry into the very earth. This is Harappa. This is Mohenjo-Daro, the twin jewels of the Indus Valley Civilization, flourishing nearly 4,500 years ago. You step onto baked brick streets, feeling their warmth under your bare feet. Every block seems planned, every lane aligned to meet another at right angles. Water flows in covered drains beneath your path, whispering that sanitation here is not an afterthought but a design. You pause to smile softly. It feels almost too modern, as though these ancient builders had skipped ahead in time, solving problems cities still wrestle with today. Historians still wonder how such order was achieved, for no evidence of kings or armies dominates the ruins. You wander past tall houses with courtyards, some rising 2 stories high. Inside, cool shadows cradle families who cook with sesame oil and wheat flour. Beads of carnelian and lapis lazuli glitter in bowls, waiting to be strung into ornaments. Outside, merchants arrange their goods, while farmers trudge in with baskets of barley. And at the heart of Mohenjo-Daro, you find a marvel, the Great Bath, a sunken pool lined with brick, sealed with bitumen. Here, perhaps, purification rituals took place, or maybe it was simply a place to cool off under the fierce sun. You can't help but whisper a little joke. Imagine the world's first public swimming pool, where someone surely complained about children splashing too loudly. Yet the mystery thickens. Seals carved with unicorn-like beasts in script too stubborn to yield line the marketplaces. Traders stamp them into clay to mark ownership, but their meaning remains hidden. Scholars have spent lifetimes trying to read the symbols, but the language still keeps its secret. You run your fingers across one, feeling grooves that once held significance. Were they prayers? Names? Or jokes scribbled like ancient graffiti? We may never know. Still, the scope of this world is breathtaking. Goods from distant Mesopotamia reach these cities: copper, timber, even luxury items traded across seas and deserts. In return, the Indus sends cotton textiles, beads, and spices. The smell of sesame oil, the shimmer of gold, the sound of clinking weights and measures, it all fills the air around you. And you realize, with a quiet sense of awe, that this is one of humanity's first global networks. As dusk falls, the city glows in its own way. Lamps flicker in windows, smoke curls from hearths, and people gather to share meals. A child laughs while chasing a clay toy cart across the street. The cool night wind drifts through alleys, carrying scents of baked bread and sweet resin. Somewhere, a priestly figure may prepare for a ceremony, or perhaps just a simple washing in the Great Bath, letting water cleanse body and spirit alike. But behind this harmony lies a riddle. By 1900 BCE, the great cities falter. Streets empty, drains clog, houses collapse into ruin. Historians still debate the reasons. Was it the shifting of rivers that abandoned them, drying up fields? Was it internal decline, too much strain on fragile systems? Or was it the arrival of new peoples, the Indo-Aryans, carrying horses and chariots from distant steppes? No single answer satisfies, and so you are left with silence, wandering streets where once tens of thousands bustled. You pause near a crumbling wall, tracing the outline of a vanished window. In the distance, jackals cry across the plains, reclaiming what humans left behind. Yet even in disappearance, something remains. Techniques of urban planning, weights and measures, and ideas of purity and order ripple outward, carried into the future by memory, trade, and legend. The Indus cities may vanish, but they do not die completely. Their echoes seep into later cultures, their discipline and design, their reverence for water, their symbols yet unread, all linger in the soil of India. You glance back once more at the Great Bath, now stilled and empty, but still radiant under the moonlight. And you know that from this silence, a new song will soon rise, the hymns of the Vedas, the fires of ritual, and the dawn of a new age. You step away from the abandoned brick cities, letting the silence of Mohenjo-Daro fade behind you, and soon the air thickens with the sound of chanting. It is softer at first, like wind through reeds, but then it grows louder, waves of syllables rising and falling in rhythm. You have entered the Vedic age, a time when the Indo-Aryans brought horses, chariots, and hymns that would shape India's spiritual identity for millennia. You sit near a fire, its flames twisting in the night, as priests, rishis, chant verses that have been memorized and passed down for centuries. Their voices tremble with reverence as sparks rise toward the stars. These are the Vedas, the sacred songs of praise, sung to gods of thunder, fire, and the dawn. Indra, the storm bringer, is called to strike down serpents. Agni, the fire itself, is honored as messenger between human and divine. And dawn is personified as a radiant goddess, spreading light across dark plains. You close your eyes and let the rhythm wash over you. One key fact historians know: the Vedas were not written at first, they lived in memory, transmitted orally with extraordinary precision. Priests trained for years, perfecting intonation, for a single wrong syllable could spoil the ritual. And so the words endured, long before ink touched palm leaf. Even today, some scholars argue that the survival of the Rigveda in nearly unchanged form over 3 millennia is one of the greatest feats of human memory. Nearby, warriors polish their chariots, the wheels gleaming with fresh wood. Horses stamp impatiently, their breath steaming in the cool night air. The Aryans prize these animals, symbols of speed and power, and their arrival changes the balance of the land. Villages expand into clans, clans into tribes, and soon kings rise, rajas, men who claim authority to lead in war and ritual. Still, much of society remains pastoral. You see herds of cattle grazing by rivers, and you learn quickly that cows are wealth itself. They are food, labor, and status. You smile softly, imagining someone bragging, "My neighbor has 10 cows, but I have 20. The pride of cattle keeping lingers even into modern India, a reminder of these roots. As fires burn, offerings are cast, clarified butter, grains, even the juice of the sacred soma plant. The priests sip soma, their eyes alight, voices soaring higher. What soma truly was, historians still wonder. Some say it was a hallucinogenic drink pressed from mountain plants, others believe it was simply a stimulant like ephedra. Its exact identity is lost, but the hymns praise it as divine nectar, a drink of immortality. You almost wish you could taste it, though perhaps it would keep you far too awake for a bedtime journey. The people's world stretches beyond ritual. Families sing lullabies, weaving their children's names into songs. Craftsmen carve wooden carts, women spin wool into thread. And in the evenings, elders tell stories of battles, of gods, of cosmic order. A symbolic tidbit lingers here, the concept of RTA, the idea that the universe has a hidden order, a rhythm that must be preserved. It is a seed that will later grow into the broader philosophy of Dharma, duty, justice, the right way of living. But for now, society is simple. Fields are plowed, rivers followed, villages clustered. Yet beneath this simplicity, debates simmer. Were the Aryans invaders who swept away the Indus people? Or were they migrants who mingled with locals over time? Scholars still argue, pointing to linguistic evidence, skeletal remains, and cultural patterns. No answer is final, but you stand at the crossroads of these mysteries, listening to the echoes of a past that resists clarity. Night deepens. The fire burns lower, casting orange shadows across chanting faces. Smoke curls upward, carrying words that blend prayer with poetry. You realize these songs, whispered in a tongue older than Sanskrit, are not merely ritual. They are the DNA of India's future. The Vedic gods will evolve, their stories reshaped, yet the hymns will continue to breathe life into temples, into philosophy, into everyday devotion. And as the last ember fades, you feel the ground shift. From these hymns will rise kingdoms and heroes, stories told in epics vast as oceans. Already, around distant fires, poets begin to weave tales of gods walking as men, of brothers at war, of dharma tested on battlefields. The Vedas open the door, the epics will fill the halls. The smoke of the Vedic fires curls into the sky, and when it clears, you find yourself standing in a land alive with stories. The rivers still flow, but now their banks echo with the thundering hooves of kings' horses, with the chants of poets, and with the clash of warriors who live larger than life. This is the age when myth and memory blend, when kingdoms rise and fall but survive forever in verse. You hear voices weaving together the Mahabharata, vast as the sea, a tapestry of duty, betrayal, and war. You walk alongside the 5 Pandava brothers, noble yet flawed, as they struggle against their cousins, the Kauravas. You feel the tension of dice games gone wrong, the agony of exile, and the roar of the battlefield at Kurukshetra. One key fact strikes you: the Mahabharata, composed across centuries, grew to over 100,000 verses, making it the longest epic poem in the world. Even today, families in India tell its stories as though they were yesterday's news. And then comes the Ramayana, gentler yet just as powerful. You follow Rama, the ideal king, through forests filled with exiles, demons, and golden deer. You meet Sita, his steadfast queen, and Hanuman, the devoted monkey warrior leaping across oceans. The tale is sweet and sorrowful, like the steady rhythm of a lullaby that never ends. It is more than myth. It becomes a moral compass, guiding hearts on what it means to love, to serve, to sacrifice. You smile softly at a symbolic detail. Storytellers often gathered under banyan trees, their voices carrying through village courtyards. Children leaned forward, eyes wide, while elders nodded knowingly, hearing truths hidden in tales. The banyan itself became a living library, sheltering generations of listeners. You can almost hear crickets chirping in the background as the stories unfurl into the warm night air. But beyond poetry, real kingdoms emerge. The Gangetic Plains, once thick with forests, are cleared by iron tools, and fields stretch wider than before. Cities grow, fortified walls rising against rivals. Monarchs claim divine favor, yet their power rests on warriors and alliances. Courts ring with debate, and ministers advise kings with wisdom that feels eerily modern. Still, much of what we know blends history with legend, leaving historians to wonder: were these epic heroes echoes of real rulers, or purely creations of imagination? The answer drifts in uncertainty. The age of epics is also an age of values. Concepts like dharma, duty and righteousness, become central. The Bhagavad Gita, nestled within the Mahabharata, speaks with haunting clarity. Do your duty, but do not cling to results. You lean in, realizing that this message has carried across centuries, guiding monks, warriors, and everyday souls through turmoil. It is as though the ancient poets anticipated the struggles of every age, including yours. You glance toward a battlefield in the distance. Chariots thunder, conch shells blare, and dust rises in clouds. Yet amid the chaos, a teacher whispers to a hesitant warrior, urging calm, clarity, and action. The battlefield itself becomes a classroom, where life's greatest lessons are taught not in temples but in the storm of conflict. A quiet aside. You might prefer your teachers gave lessons in a cozy classroom rather than in the middle of war drums. But then again, some lessons only settle into the heart when life itself feels at stake. As the epics spread, they travel far beyond the land where they were born. Traders carry them across seas, pilgrims carry them along roads, and bards retell them with local flavors. In villages, you might hear Rama praised in songs of devotion, while in courts, kings model themselves on Pandava heroes. The line between myth and statecraft blurs until one sustains the other. And when the day ends, the stories do not fade. Around every fire, someone is telling them again, weaving memory into myth, myth into identity. You linger beneath a banyan tree as the storyteller's voice softens, children drifting to sleep, their dreams filled with flying monkeys and mighty warriors. You realize, gently, that you too are being lulled by the rhythm of the oldest bedtime stories in the world. From these tales, kingdoms gather shape, cities strengthen, and voices rise not only in song but also in debate. For ahead lies the age of iron and bustling cities, where philosophy and politics share space with plows and markets. The epics will live on, but history presses forward. You feel the epics still humming in your chest as dawn presses a pale silver across the Gangetic plains, and then you hear a new rhythm, iron biting wood. Axes thud into trunks, sparks jump from anvils, and the forest opens like a curtain to reveal fields of young rice gleaming with monsoon dew. You walk among farmers guiding iron-tipped plows, the soil turning dark and fragrant. With every furrow, the land breathes easier, and with every harvest, people gather closer, villages stitching themselves into towns, towns quickening into cities. Market streets wake in layers. Potters set their wheels whirring. The clay shines wet, then dries to a fine black sheen that catches the light, northern black polished ware, elegant as night water. Weavers tighten looms, wooden frames thumping a sleepy heartbeat. Smiths lift hammers, the ring of metal bright in the morning air. Merchants spread cloth on the ground and place shining punch-marked coins atop the folds, small suns stamped with symbols that stand for value and trust. One soft aside, you try to look like you understand the prices, but a shrewd shopkeeper can probably smell your confusion from 3 stalls away. Caravans drift in along the Uttarapatha, that northern road reaching toward the passes, and along the Dakshinapatha, threading south through forests and rivers. Bullock carts creak, sandalwood breathes its resin, and bales of cotton and indigo settle in tidy stacks. From the northwest, Taxila calls with its crossroads energy. From the central plains, Kashi and Kosala brighten like stars rising together. Farther east, Magadha gathers weight, its hills and valleys drawing traders, monks, and kings. You taste salt on the breeze at River Ghats, where boats nose gently against steps worn smooth by countless feet. The Ganga and her sister rivers become highways of liquid light. A key fact crystallizes here. By the 6th-5th centuries BCE, the subcontinent knows the Mahajanapadas, 16 great realms, names like Magadha, Kosala, Kashi, Anga, Vatsa, Avanti, and Gandhara, each with its own laws, markets, and ambitions. Not all are monarchies. Some are Gana Sanghas, republic-like assemblies where leaders of clans debate beneath sala trees or in timber halls, voices rising and falling in measured cadence. You stand at the circle's edge as attendants light lamps and pass water, and an elder strikes the staff for silence. Matters of taxation, war, and road repair are argued with patience and pride. A gentle joke flits by. Committees, you notice, seem timeless. Someone always wants just one more meeting before the decision. The forest edge, once a hard border, retreats before iron. Palisades rise around towns, moat water laps at earthen walls, and gatehouses collect the dust of arrivals. Inside, streets are straighter than before, drains carry rain away. Ring wells, those stacked ceramic cylinders, drop coolness into courtyards. A child plays with a clay elephant. A scribe nicks a palm leaf with a sharp stylus, tying records with a cord. The air smells of ghee and sesame, of damp soil and hot metal, of spices that will one day seduce distant palates. Guilds, srenas, take shape. Weavers, metalworkers, bead cutters, each with rules for quality, mutual aid, and fair prices. Their pride is almost ceremonial. They process in festivals, banners bright with emblems of their craft. Between stalls, ideas travel faster than goods. A wandering teacher offers a parable about duty and self. A forest philosopher speaks of breath and being. The Upanishadic hush of questions asked softly enough for the soul to overhear. Disputations flare and soften at dinner. Lineage, ritual, the nature of reality, then are carried to the next town like embers in a clay pot. Historians still wonder whether these roving debates emerged chiefly from the prosperity of cities, or whether the debates themselves catalyzed new urban forms by attracting patrons and pupils. Either way, you can feel the feedback loop tightening. Grain feeds surplus, surplus feeds thought, thought rearranges the world. In the Republican lands of the Vajji Confederacy, you find another rhythm. Messengers run between councils. Roads are maintained with care. Guardians at the gate hold spears lightly, more custodians than conquerors. Yet even here, power is no pure equalizer. Historians still wonder whether the Ganasangas were genuine democracies or oligarchies of a few aristocratic clans. You watch the debate circle and notice jewelry heavy at the necks of speaking elders, lineage marks bright on arms. Hierarchy has a way of slipping back into any open seat. Symbol lingers in ordinary things. The iron plowshare becomes more than a tool, a quiet badge of transformation. The ring well, a small cylinder of stability in a world of rain and heat. The banyan beside the market, a canopy for memory, its aerial roots suggesting the many paths a city offers. At dusk, oil lamps seem to float like seeds on the river of air, each wick a small vow to keep darkness gentle. As Magadha stretches, you drift through Rajagriha's encircling hills. Warm stone holds the day's heat, narrow passes funnel wind into sighs. Courtiers step softly across polished floors, treasuries count coin by coin. A road climbs toward a rocky crest where the view spills across fields and streams, an empire in embryo. You catch a rumor in a marketplace, of a fort begun near a village called Patalagrama, a place that will matter more in chapters yet to unfold. You tuck the name away like a traveler's talisman. The city's evening unspools. Drumbeats call watchmen to their posts. A conch answers from the river. The last carts rattle through the gate. In a courtyard, a grandmother ties a thread around a child's wrist, a charm against illness. In a shrine, a merchant leaves a clay lamp before a yaksha guardian, asking for safe journeys and honest waits tomorrow. One more aside to keep the edges soft. You consider leaving an offering of a good night's sleep, but decide to pay with gratitude instead. The shrine seems to accept the currency. Not everything gleams. Roads flood. Granaries mold. Thieves test walls. Rival states squeeze tolls from caravans. Famine can shadow a harvest. Disease can creep along the trade routes as stealthily as perfume. Yet the cities endure because they solve problems in public. A broken culvert is patched by morning. A dispute over a loan is arbitrated beneath the banyan. A guild donates coin to repair the shrine steps, partly from piety, partly from sensible branding. The shared life becomes its own defense. On the river, boats drift by torchlight, their reflections shaking like golden fish. A singer's voice rides the water, lilting over names you've met before. Kashi, Kosala, Magadha, Avanti, Gandhara, now less like far-off constellations and more like neighbors sharing walls. The pattern is familiar from our earlier wanderings. Order emerges, then stretches. Stories form, then guide. Tools appear, then rewrite the land. Remember the banyan storytellers and the first kings we met? Their whispers have become policies, their hopes, streets. There is a quiet inevitability to the next turn. Concentrated wealth, riverine highways, and iron hardened will begin to attract the kind of mind that sees not 16 realms but one horizon. You feel it before you hear it, the way a storm is sensed by birds, the gathering of administrative habit, the taste for codified law, the appetite for roads that do not end at borders. From the bazaars of Kashi to the forts of Magadha, officials compare notes, scribes standardize marks, couriers chart distances with a professional's calm. You know, in your bones, that an empire is practicing its first scales. Night lowers like a kind hand. A seller folds her awning. A scribe closes his palm leaf bundle. A smith leans his hammer against the anvil and sits, satisfied, in the doorway. The city exhales, and you do as well, hearing only the soft wash of the river and the distant creak of a cart finding home. And in that hush, iron cools, coins rest, and the Mahajanapadas sleep, unaware that a young strategist will soon rearrange their map, and a compassionate king will carve his thoughts in stone. You wake to the rustle of palms along a wide river, and the name you tucked away returns like a bird to the same branch, Patalagrama, now swelling into Pataliputra. Timber wharves creak, barges unload grain, and across the water a palisade runs like a wooden horizon. Officials pace the gates with lists in hand, ink-stained and efficient. The murmuring map of the Mahajanapadas has begun to speak with one voice. You step into the morning of the Mauryas. A quickening passes through the streets, messengers knot cords at their belts, accountants stack punch-marked coins into careful towers, and scribes freshen their styluses over palm leaf. At the city's center, a strategist with keen eyes confers with a teacher whose patience cuts sharper than iron. You know their names, Chandragupta and Chanakya, later remembered as Kautilya. Legend tells of a vow made in a storm to unseat arrogant rule. Policy tells of roads, granaries, and taxes written down so grain and power stop slipping through fingers. The city feels like a loom, and you can hear empire threading itself on every street. One key fact steadies your footing. Around 321 BCE, Chandragupta topples the Nanda power in Magadha and begins an empire that will stretch from the Indus to the Bay of Bengal, and from the Himalayan foothills into the Deccan's uplands. In the northwest he meets Seleucus Nicator, a successor to Alexander. War tests borders and then yields to treaty. Territory shifts hands, and elephants cross as diplomatic gifts, very large signatures on a very official agreement. A soft aside, apparently even emperors sometimes settle things with receipts and a handshake, just bigger. In Pataliputra, you walk a boulevard shaded by trees. Megasthenes, a Greek envoy, will later describe a timber-walled city pierced by gates and guarded by towers, its avenues straight, its markets loud with measure and weight. Historians still wonder how much of his portrait is exact measurement and how much is diplomatic flourish, but your feet know this. The ground thumps with administration. Districts are tallied, guilds are registered, ferries keep timetables the river only sometimes respects. A courier departs with a tablet of wax and returns with one of clay, redundancy before the word existed. You pause at a hall where the teacher, Kautilya, lays out the art of rule. Later ages will gather this wisdom under the title Arthashastra, a treatise on statecraft, taxation, diplomacy, and, yes, espionage. Historians still debate its final authorship and date. Was it truly Kautilya's book later compiled, or a school's collected voice? But its practicality is unmistakable. Keep granaries near, keep roads repaired, keep eyes open. You glance around, suddenly suspicious of the parent on the eaves. It blinks back with an innocent look that absolutely fails to convince you it isn't on payroll. Through seasons, the empire muscles into routine. Roads are crowned and ditched so monsoon water does not drown the ruts. Milestones guard the verges like small gray sentries. Travelers find shade beneath rest houses. Wells cool the tongue. A far market announces itself by the cinnamon sigh in the air. In frontier towns, the emperor's seal presses clay like a calm hand on a restless table. Standard waits coax trust from strangers. If you listen closely, you can hear the hum we met in Iron Age bazaars now tuned into chords, guild, court, tax, road, music of a state that prefers systems to luck. Chandragupta, having set the frame, turns in age toward renunciation, and his son Bindusara keeps the machine steady. Then the air brightens with a new presence. A prince climbs the peacock throne, fierce in youth, searching in maturity. His name is Ashoka. His reign, beginning in the 3rd century BCE, will give the empire its gentlest thunder. Early in his rule, war rolls east toward Kalinga. What happened there is recorded in numbers that widen the eyes, though the exact figures remain uncertain. Inscriptions lament suffering, chronicles disagree. Historians still wonder how to read the scale of that sorrow. You spare your mind the arithmetic and rest on the feeling. Victory that tastes like ash. A turning follows. Stone begins to speak. You watch as pillars rise. Monoliths of polished sandstone, fluted like tree trunks, grounded in lotus bells, crowned with animals that seem to inhale the wind. Lions back to back at Sarnath, a serene bull, a horse ready to step. The lion capital, in time, will be taken up as a modern emblem of India, and the wheel carved on many stones, the Dharmachakra, will one day turn at the heart of the nation's flag. For now, you stand in their shade and trace letters cut in Brahmi script, sentences that travel farther and more gently than chariots ever did. Edicts go where armies once did, to hill caves where monks listen as if the rock itself were an ear, to coastal slabs washed by waves and salt wind, to crossroads where ox carts pause and children point upward at royal sentences. Inspectors move about not to seize but to remind. Plant trees, dig wells, tend the sick, spare living creatures when you can, honor parents, speak gently. A symbolic tidbit slips into your palm, medicinal herbs sent to neighboring realms, because the boundary of compassion is not a borderline but a habit of hand and heart. You visit monasteries newly quiet and newly busy. Under shady groves, monks fold robes and debate softly. In cities, the laity offers alms with a quiet pride. Tradition tells of missions to Sri Lanka, of Mahinda and Sangamita carrying teachings and a cutting of the Bodhi tree, a living line of shade. Somewhere a sapling takes root, and with it the idea that empires can export kindness as readily as coin. You breathe easier, one more aside, because this is a diplomacy your pillow approves. Yet even Ashoka's turn does not erase complexity. Revenue must be gathered, disputes judged, borders watched. Historians still wonder how far his Dhamma reached everyday life. Was it widely lived or politely heard? And how centralized the Mauryan grip truly was. Provincial governors weigh local custom against imperial order. Village councils continue to mend roads and count seed. Guilds keep their charters close. The unity feels less like a single shout and more like many voices singing in tune. At day's slope, you walk among the pillars again. They shine with a finish so smooth you might mistake stone for water. You lay your cheek against the cool and feel the faintest tremor, the memory of chisels, the patience of quarrymen, the math of moving giants across mud and heat. These are more than monuments. They are tall promises, saying, let the law be visible, the ruler accountable, the ethic public. Remember the Banyan storytellers? Here the trunk is stone, the story a proclamation, the audience anyone who passes by on an ordinary errand. Back in the capital, clerks close bundles of palm leaf, guards lean spears and trade recipes. Somewhere a superintendent of roads consults a map that looks suspiciously like a tidy dream. A final soft aside, every age, it seems, hides a person who loves forms to be stamped. May their ink never dry crooked. You smile and step outside the gate as lamps kindle in a line along the palisade, fireflies agreeing with city planners. A last glance across the map shows roads like threads drawn taut, ports purling with ships, elephants moving as slow thunder, and forests parted by the careful arithmetic of surveyors. You look back toward where we began, villages by the river, seals with unread signs, hymns by firelight, and forward to what will come, a golden light of art and number, traders who read monsoon like a calendar, and new creeds conversing beneath arches and domes. The Mauryan vision has built the long hallway we will keep walking, and the next door is already in view. Dawn lifts over the Ganga plain like silk, and the roads that Ashoka once marked now carry a gentler cargo. Poets, scholars, and artisans traveling between courts where conversation itself feels like a sport. You arrive as banners stir above Pataliputra and Ujjain, and a dynasty steadies its hand on the pulse of the land, the Guptas. Temple bells answer the clink of gold dinars. Palm leaf bundles shuffle in libraries. A sculptor taps stone so softly it feels as if he is persuading a statue to wake. You pass a column of horsemen riding light and fast. On their pennants shines Garuda, the eagle mount of Vishnu, a sign that this house favors the preserver's calm over the conqueror's roar. Chandragupta I sets the frame. Samudragupta stretches it with campaigns that map influence more than uniform rule. And Chandragupta II, Vikramaditya in later memory, lets the light fall long on art and trade. One key fact you can hold like a coin: Gupta gold currency, struck with astonishing finesse, shows kings as archers, lyre players, tiger slayers, little biographies in metal that traveled farther and better than most rumors. Markets are lively, but the studios pull you in. At Sarnath and Mathura, sandstone softens beneath chisels until bodhisattvas and deities stand with downcast eyes and a smile that is almost a breath, the serene, classical ideal that will define Gupta grace. Drapery ripples with grammar. Limbs are human yet slightly more than human, as if stillness had learned to move. Across the Deccan and Ajanta's caves, paint wakes on wet plaster. Blue-green jungles, courtiers with jeweled brows, faces caught between breath and thought. Patrons are many, Gupta neighbors, Vakataka allies, but the spirit feels shared, a will to make serenity visible. Sanskrit pours from the halls like warm light. You sit cross-legged near a poet whose metaphors land like feathers and like thunder. Kalidasa speaks, and the forests listen. In Sakuntala, a ring lost and found tethers memory to fate. In Meghaduta, a cloud becomes a messenger carrying a lover's sigh across monsoon distances. You quietly promise you will not cry over a cloud and, of course, you do, very professionally, while the librarian pretends not to notice. Grammar itself turns musical as scholars polish expression. Even a simple greeting arrives with a certain measured glow. Astronomy joins the chorus. In Ujjain, you find Aryabhata charting the sky with numbers as calm as midnight. He proposes that Earth rotates, explains eclipses as shadows rather than dragon bites, and approximates pi so closely that circles seem to settle down. Place value arithmetic crystallizes in practice, and zero steps from silence into symbol, not just a gap, but a working sign that lets the abacus sing and lets equations cross long rivers in a single line. Historians still wonder whether this invention belongs to one pen or to a long river of scribes and accountants, but you can feel the current, columns of figures learning to breathe together. Walk the university groves and monasteries. At Nalanda, monks file between red brick shrines and cool cloisters. Storerooms breathe palm leaf and ink. Lecture courts murmur in accents from lands you cannot see. Tradition places Nalanda's flowering within this age, though its exact foundations are a braid of rulers and decades. Historians still wonder whether Kumaragupta's patronage began the complex or simply amplified an older scholastic seed. Either way, teachers trace geometry with sticks on dust. Students lean in. A crow hops on the parapet like a very small, very opinionated examiner. You smile, grateful there's no surprise quiz at bedtime. Not all learning sits at desks. Guild halls thrum with looms. Steel sings at the edge of small furnaces. Ivory carvers coax gleam from grain. Temple architects test the upward pull of the shikara in the north, the early Nagara silhouette like a mountain compressed into prayer. At Dioga's Dashavatara temple, a high plinth frames reliefs where Vishnu reclines upon the serpent Ananta, dreaming the world. You feel the stone breathe that unhurried cosmic rhythm. A symbolic tidbit glows here. The lotus carved beneath a deity's feet suggests not just beauty, but buoyancy, how the sacred rests on the waters without sinking. Commerce keeps time by monsoon and star. Ships leave western ports toward the Red Sea. Spices, cottons, and carved objects ride in hulls beside ideas that never declare customs. Inland, caravan bells count the miles between market towns. At river ghats, brokers meet beneath awnings and argue with smiles. A conch sounds from a temple porch, and conversation pauses the way it does for a passing train. Everyone listens, then bargaining resumes, a shade kinder for the interruption. Honest aside, you try to haggle with the gentleness of a monk. The merchant smiles and gently relieves you of that illusion. Order, though, is not monochrome. Inscriptions praise kings, but the map looks like lace. Core lands firm, edges braided with tributaries and allies. Historians still wonder whether the Gupta polity was a tight bureaucracy or a generous umbrella. Did authority touch every farmer's field, or mostly guilds and local chiefs who liked the brand but kept their own schedules? Copperplate grants describe land assigned to Brahmins and monasteries. Village assemblies keep their own books and mend their own embankments. The empire hums less like a single drum and more like many instruments agreeing on a raga. Symbol shines everywhere. Coins show Lakshmi seated on a lotus, wealth meant to sit lightly, not crush. In Delhi, an iron pillar stands and refuses to rust, its inscription whispering a king's name, Chandra, beneath a sky that has watched many roofs come and go. You lay your palm on the metal. It is cooler than the air, older than the nearest story, and perfectly content to mind its chemistry while scholars debate attribution. Historians still wonder whether its famed resilience is recipe or luck or a metallurgist's art not yet fully recovered. Even in a golden light, shadows draw honest shapes. Frontier troubles test their manners. Hunas press from the northwest. Prices and earthquakes do what they always do to delicate balances. Court poets prefer victories. Village songs remember storms. Later, people will call this a golden age. Historians still wonder whether labels help or hide. Were these decades brighter for everyone, or mostly for those who sat near the lamps? You hold both truths gently, the way you would carry an oil lamp along a dark veranda. Careful, steady, grateful for the glow, mindful of the wind. What you can feel, firm as a temple threshold, is continuity maturing. The epics we heard beneath banyans are now staged with costume and dance. Arithmetic grows into algebraic poise. Compassion that Ashoka wrote on pillars curls into public wells endowed by guilds. A child draws the numeral for 10 in dust and adds a small circle with delight. A merchant balances accounts in neat lines that look like flocks of tiny birds. A dancer flicks an ankle bell and writes, with sound, the same rhythm a poet sets on a page. One more aside to keep the corners soft. You promise to return the borrowed palm leaf on time. The librarian gives you the kind of smile that says she has heard that vow in every century. Night folds in. Lamps bloom along verandas. Parrots quarrel politely in peepal trees. A poet rehearses one line until the cadence lands like a soft foot on a wooden stair. When you rise, the path ahead is already traced by teachers and traders who will carry this learning outward. Monks bound for Southeast Asia. Mathematicians whose figures will one day whisper in Arabic, then in Latin, then in every classroom that files the world into columns and rows. Remember the wheel on Ashoka's pillars? You see it again, turning. knowledge distributing weight so the cart does not fail. The road bends now toward faiths entwining, oceans busy with hulls and hopes, and arches that will lift new skylines against the moon. You follow the wheel we saw turning, knowledge, mercy, order, and realize another wheel turns beside it, devotion. Roads that once ferried tax and timber now carry monks with bowls, pilgrims with vows, and philosophers with questions wrapped in cloth. A morning breeze moves through people leaves. The light flickers like thought itself. You step into courtyards where incense rises, across monastery cloisters where sandals whisper, and into forests where hermits argue with bird-like politeness about the nature of the self. At Sanchi the path climbs gently and the world becomes round. A dome, stupa, swells from the earth like a hill tamed by love. You trace the railings that ring it, the gateways crowded with stories, elephants bathing, queens dreaming, kings renouncing, a riderless horse standing in for the Buddha whose presence is suggested rather than shown. One key fact steadies your hand on the stone. The great stupa's core dates to Ashoka's time in the 3rd century BCE, and the graceful gateways were added centuries later, around the 1st century BCE, under the Shungas. You feel the layers like breath, vow upon vow, ring upon ring, pilgrims circling sunwise until their footsteps are part of the monument's architecture. South and east, whitewashed monasteries lean into sea winds at Amravati. Farther west, rock runs like honeycomb at Kanari. In the Deccan and along the northern escarpments, caves bloom with columns and painted ceilings. Ajanta's soft gaze you remember, and at Ellora a living mountain is persuaded to reveal Kailasa, a freestanding temple carved downward from the top. You tilt your head, half bewildered, half delighted, and whisper a soft aside to the stonecutters. Next time, perhaps start from the ground? The cliffs, patient as always, do not answer. Jain mendicants step lightly beside you, white robes like moving moonlight. In their halls, Tirthankaras, ford makers across the river of existence, sit in stillness. The sound here is carefully sparse, a bell's thread, a broom softly swishing to spare tiny life. In Gujarat, temple spires knit lattices of light. Marble at Mount Abu flows into filigree so delicate you expect a breeze to ring it like a chime. A symbolic tidbit lingers on your tongue. A grain of rice placed before an image, an offering so modest it becomes infinite. Restraint, you learn, can be as ornate as any jewel. Under banyans and in lecture courts, arguments remain affectionate and sharp. The forest-born hush of the Upanishads complicates into schools, Samkhya counting realities, Yoga yoking breath to being, Nyaya sharpening logic, Vaisesika sorting substances like a cosmic apothecary, Mimamsa guarding rituals grammar, Vedanta braiding the whole into a vision of unity. You sit with a teacher who traces syllables on your palm as if sketching a map of the mind. Historians still wonder whether these darsanas formed in a tidy sequence or braided together over centuries through debate, commentary, and the practical needs of monks, kings, and householders. The truth, you suspect, is a conversation that never fully ends. Meanwhile, the gods you met in fire-lit hymns have learned temple habits. Vishnu sleeps on the cosmic serpent and wakes as Rama and Krishna. Shiva sits as a mountain stillness and dances the world to cinders and back. Devi gathers as Durga, Kali, Lakshmi, Saraswati, fierce and tender in a single glance. The Puranas take old rivers and dig new channels, bringing myth to the neighborhood well. You watch a family place a lamp on evening water. The flame does not fear its reflection. Another aside slips out as you try a perfect lotus pose on the steps and your knee negotiates a kinder geometry. Even the body, you discover, prefers gradual enlightenment. Southward, new music swells. In Tamil country, saints walk the roads barefoot, tears bright as jewels when they sing to Shiva and Vishnu. The Nine Mars and Alvars, 6th to 9th centuries by the heartbeat of memory, turn devotion into rainfall. Temples answer with gopurams, tall gateways patterned like woven thunderheads, while processional bronze carries gods through streets so all can see and be seen. Historians still wonder whether bhakti rose chiefly from rural hunger for intimacy with the divine or from courts that found in devotion a politics of cohesion. Perhaps both. A chorus can begin in the field and be harmonized in the palace, and the song still belongs to everyone who hums it. In kitchens and courtyards, faith becomes habit. A tulsi plant is given its own little shrine, watered at dawn. Lamps are lit at thresholds. Foreheads wear ash or sandal paste. 3 cool lines or a quiet dot, the simplest crown. You accept a bit of prasad, sweetness offered and shared, and notice how sharing dilates the room. A symbolic tidbit glows here too. The bell rung before prayer is said to invite attention. You ring it again, gently. A priest smiles with the indulgence one saves for children and sleepy historians. Buddhist paths continue outward even as home ground changes. Monks sail with traders to Sri Lanka and up the Malay Peninsula, to Funan, to Java, their bowls a kind of passport stamped by kindness. In the north and northwest, monasteries face both patronage and wind. Dynasties shift, caravan routes tilt, old endowments thin. New forms, Mahayana's vast compassion, and later Vajrayana's esoteric maps, polish different tools for the same mountain. Historians still wonder why Buddhism's roots steadily loosened in much of India proper between the 7th and 12th centuries. Was it the pull of a temple-centered Hinduism, the changing economies of trade, the loss of royal patrons, or simply that spiritual households, like any households, rearrange themselves over time? You hold the question as you would a lamp, not to solve the night, but to see your feet. Pilgrimage keeps the subcontinent stitched. You meet travelers swapping stories at Prayaga's confluence, at Kanchipuram's silk-bright shrines, at Jagannath's coast where the ocean speaks in paragraphs. At Gaya, a Bodhi sapling throws heart-shaped shade. In Kashmir's valleys, Sanskrit scholars compare notes with poets of snow. A soft aside. You vow to keep up with every festival calendar. 3 minutes later you've surrendered to the obvious. Time in India is exuberant. Not all crossings are smooth. Philosophers disagree about whether the world is two-tiered or one, whether knowledge liberates alone or must be married to love, whether the soul is a spark from a central sun or a moon that shines by its own right. Yet you notice how often disagreement is carried in song, dance, and commentary rather than in swords. When temples and monasteries do fall to time, flood, or politics, the memory tends to reassemble itself somewhere nearby. The story keeps a spare key. At evening, a conch calls from a temple porch, and birds rethread themselves into the same banyan we used as a library in earlier nights. You watch a teacher close his palm leaf bundle with a string, then open his hand to a child who has a question about a story, or maybe a mango. In the west the sky turns copper, in the east it keeps one last streak of blue. Perfume of jasmine climbs a wall. The wheel beside the wheel turns, ritual into ethics, ethics into daily gentleness back into ritual. And you feel the smoothness of that circle in your breathing. Remember the law on pillars? The learning in courts, the art that sculpted serenity from sandstone? In this chapter of our walk, all three are braided by devotion. Ethical edicts softened into personal vows, mathematics of time kept by festival moons, sculpture warmed by garlands and touch. The result is not a single creed but a choreography, Jain quietness, Buddhist compassion, Hindu plurality moving like 3 dancers sharing a stage, sometimes trading steps, sometimes turning alone, yet always finishing on the same beat. Night arrives with bells settling into silence. A cow sighs in a lane. A monk's bowl clicks softly as it's set down. Somewhere a drummer tests a rhythm for tomorrow's procession and then remembers the neighbors, easing his hands. You do the same with your thoughts, quieting, but not finished. Ahead, the ocean is waiting like a wide threshold, monsoon as a clock, stars as a ledger. Traders will carry pepper and poetry. Sailors will fold prayer into sailcloth. Ports will learn to speak 3 languages before breakfast. Faith will travel with them, not as a passenger but as a compass, and the horizon will answer. Night leaves the ocean like a curtain pulled back, and you feel the air change. Salt on your lips, tar in the ropes, gulls writing casual commas across a pale sky. The road of ideas and incense you've been following becomes water, becomes rhythm, becomes the season itself. Monsoon is the clock, and you listen for its tick. Winds that lean one way half the year and lean back the other, telling sailors when to loosen moorings and when to tie the world tighter to shore. On a west coast jetty, sewn plank boats tap each other like old friends. Core rope threads through hulls, palm fiber stitches holding timber the way village stories hold memory, flexible but faithful. A pilot squints along the horizon line, reading the water's grammar. Long swell from the deep, short chop in the harbor, a darker band that means fish here. You learn your first sea habit: stand with your knees, not just your feet. A soft aside. You promise you won't get seasick. The ocean smiles, and you immediately renegotiate your promise with smaller print. Pepper vines climb in the inland shade like green scribbles toward the sun. In courtyards, handfuls of peppercorns click into clay jars, each little bead a bead of wealth. Cardamom and cinnamon slip into sacks, cotton cloth is folded in meticulous stacks, indigo stains fingers in aristocratic blue. Pearl fishers in the Gulf of Mannar sort shells by feel. Iron masters in the south cool crucibles that yield Wootz steel, bars with a secret internal weather that swordsmiths abroad will prize for centuries. Ports learn to speak many tongues before breakfast: fisher's slang, courtly Sanskrit, Tamil quick as oars, a trader's Prakrit that counts faster than it sings, and the clipped consonants of visitors who will be called Yavana in local verse. A key fact steadies you on the key: a Greek mariner's guide, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, composed in the 1st century CE, names Indian ports like Barigasa, Bharuch, and Muziris, often linked to Pattanam in Kerala, and explains how sailors use seasonal winds to cross the Arabian Sea in bold arcs rather than timid coasts. Roman amphorae wash up in archaeology like stranded punctuation. Hordes of imperial gold coins glint from Tamil Nadu fields, and Pliny will grumble that India drains Rome of treasure in exchange for luxuries no one truly needs, luxuries everyone keeps buying anyway. You walk the wharf at Muziris as a ship from the Red Sea ties up, hull smelling of frankincense and resin. Dockmen sing a counting song that stacks amphorae into pyramids of promise. A broker with a palm leaf tally lifts 2 fingers, one for pepper, one for pearls, and you watch as negotiations turn into a dance of hands, smiles, and measured silences. You try your own bargain, adding what you hope is a wise nod. The merchant kindly gives you the beginner's price, fair enough to make you grateful, clever enough to make you return. Down the coast and around the Horn of Sri Lanka, harbors like Manti breathe between lagoons. Up the Coromandel, Kavaripattanam, Pahar, unfurls a strand of warehouses and poets, its seafront buzzing the way beehives must dream of buzzing. Inland, the Sangam poets sing of Yavana ships, of bright-eyed courtesans, of kings whose generosity flows like the Kaveri in flood. A cultural tidbit clings to the waterline: the Tamil catamaran, logs bound together, gives the world a sturdy word, catamaran, for boats that ride waves as if they were hills with soft manners. On the eastern edge, Tamralipta opens like a copper mouth to the Bay of Bengal. Farther south, the winds widen the world. Bengal cloth edges the Malay Peninsula. Beads from the Deccan punctuate Java's wrists. Monks share cabins with merchants as far as Funan and beyond. You meet a captain who swears he can smell rain a day out and who keeps a shrine to a sea goddess tucked behind the sternpost. Flowers changed at dawn, a lamp cupped by the wind. In Kerala backwaters, Oarsmen row snakeboats long as streets. Their Vanshapatu, the boat songs, braid muscle to rhythm until the whole craft becomes a single creature running on water. Historians still wonder whether a single navigator named Hippolytus discovered the monsoon route in one dramatic leap, or whether generations of Arabian, Indian, and East African sailors refined the pattern until a Greek pen simply wrote it down. Either way, you feel the knowledge in your bones. Leave with the southwest winds, return with the northeast. Trust the sky's timetable. Fold prayer into sailcloth just in case. Warehouses make their own weather, cool, grain dry, smelling of rope and fruit. A guild scribe marks bales with symbols, weights thud, measures tip, seals pinch clay. Women sort pepper on floor mats, laughter passing like breeze. A priest walks a short circuit with a conch and a brass bell, sanctifying labor with sound. A child drops a peppercorn and, solemnly, offers it to the sea. You watch a chalked column, a doorstep drawing of rice flour, welcoming fortune, and you realize port culture is half logistics, half choreography. The choreography helps with the nerves. Not all is cargo and coin. Stories arrive salted and leave sweeter. A sailor from Aden tells a fable about a hoopoe bird guiding caravans. A monk returning from Sri Lanka carries verses that will fit perfectly in a village evening 2 months inland. Texts travel as surely as textiles. At Arakamadu near modern Pondicherry, shards of Roman wine jars clink softly in the dust. At Baruch, a broker can list, without looking up, the tariff on tortoise shell, tin, and thin cloth that dries faster than a rumor. You smile at the last item. Every place has its specialty. The map keeps time differently at sea. Kingdoms on shore, Shera, Chola, Pandya in the south. Powers along the Deccan and the Ganga, rise and recede, yet the ports keep a kind of long memory. In later centuries, Chola fleets will ride east with confidence, touching at Srivijaya and calling at Kadaram, traders and envoys making the sea a letter that folds both ways. Even earlier, without imperial fanfare, fishermen's sons become helmsmen, helmsmen become pilots, pilots retire to teach wind like a subject with exams. You pass a shed where a worn star chart hangs beside a string of shells. Both are instruments, one for the eye, one for the ear. Debate rides the tide as well. Was Muziris exactly at Patanum or just upriver in a reach now shifted by silt? Did the Roman gold drain genuinely dent Mediterranean economies, or is Pliny's complaint mostly moral theater? Did Wootz steel's secret lie primarily in ore chemistry, crucible carbon, or the slow cool of a patient smith? The scholarly weather is changeable. The harbor of agreement opens and closes with new digs, new assays, new readings of old lines. You find you enjoy the uncertainty. It leaves room for another voyage. Temple spires keep watch over quay and market. In the shadow of a Gapuram, a bronze of the god takes an evening stroll through streets, swinging gently in a palanquin. Shop shutters tilt like eyelids, and incense walks ahead of the bearers. A lamp floats down the river, trailing its reflection, and a fisherman bows as it passes, because why not bow to a small star when you can? A symbolic tidbit stays with you, the conch, blown at docks to signal departure, blown in sanctuaries to invite the mind home. One instrument for two kinds of horizon. There are hard days. Monsoon misreads cost lives. Reefs keep their own counsel. Pirates learn which coasts make officials drowsy. Customs men can be heavy-handed. Weights can be shaved. Mildew loves an unattended bale. But repairs are rituals, too. A split plank is stitched, caulked with lime and oil. A stolen cargo is replaced with pooled coin and careful vows. The pilot's child is named after the wind that brought him back. You remember Ashoka's pillars speaking ethics at crossroads, and you see how, in ports, ethics is mostly habit. Keep the rope dry, keep the ledger honest, keep the shrine swept, keep the harbor open. When the season turns, the world pivots. Ships waiting like patient herons suddenly stir all at once. Sails go up, drums call cadence, and the harbor becomes a calendar page turned with both hands. You stand at the end of the jetty as hulls lean into the push and one by one slip past the bar into the wider sentence of the sea. Somewhere behind you, a poet in a Spicetown room pauses over a line about longing. Somewhere ahead, a shopkeeper in Aden puts out a dish of fennel and hopes the next convoy likes his prices. The ocean stitches them together with a thread of wind. Remember the old highways of river and road? This is the same story, only larger. Things moving, people meeting, ideas changing outfits and accents. Guild rules soften into port customs. Bhakti songs find new scales. Zero, of all things, stows away in accounting books and then shows a Roman, an Arab, a monk, a broker how to hold emptiness as a number that does real work. The wheel on Ashoka's lion capital spins again in your mind. Here is a helm. Here is a sun. Here is the roundness of a stupa, and the turning keeps travel from feeling like loss. Evening lowers a lavender hush. Nets come in shining with the last light. A boy chases crabs sideways and laughs with the dignity of a king. A cat performs quality control on a fish basket without filling out any forms. One last soft aside. You decide you could live in a port city forever as long as someone else coils the ropes neatly. The sailors shake their heads in kindly disbelief. Lamps sprinkle the waterfront. A drummer finds the slow heartbeat that means safe return, and the town answers one porch at a time. You walk the beach until foam draws lacy maps at your feet. East and west feel less like directions now and more like friends taking turns speaking. When you lie down, you still feel a little of the deck moving under you, a memory of balance learned in your ankles. Ahead, stone will rise in new shapes and arches will make cool shade, and armies from far lands will walk through foreign gates and call them home for a while. Traders will keep trading under every flag, because the sea obeys seasons, not slogans, and tomorrow's rulers will learn, again, that harbors listen to wind first and power second. You leave the tide-marked piers behind and follow the caravan bells inland until the horizon rearranges itself into walls, bastions, and a skyline of new intentions. Stone arches rise where corbelled lintels once strained. Calligraphy walks across facades. Gardens are squared like thoughts that prefer symmetry. You enter Delhi, really many Delhis, where rulers from the northwest make a capital and, almost by accident, make a mosaic. At a dusty camp a standard snaps in the wind. Horses stamp. A commander studies the map of the Indo-Gangetic Plain as if it were a chessboard you have already seen in dreams. A key fact steadies you. After the Ghurid victory at the Second Battle of Tehran in 1192, power in North India tilts decisively toward new hands, and by 1206 Qutb al-Din Aibak is acknowledged as Sultan, beginning a chain of dynasties historians group as the Delhi Sultanate. You watch officials learn new titles, scribes switch to Persian for state business, and seasoned village headmen nod and keep the irrigation channels running because rice is unimpressed by politics. South of the ridge, a tower climbs like a fluted prayer. The Qutb Minar, banded with calligraphy, alternating angles and curves, lifts you almost into the sky. About 73 meters, your knees whisper while looking up. At its feet, the Quwat al-Islam Mosque folds spolia from earlier temples into arcades of new grammar. You run your fingers across stone that has learned a second language. Historians still wonder whether the complex should be read chiefly as triumph, adaptation, or both, a visible palimpsest where conquest, craft, and continuity live uneasily together. A soft aside. You try to read every line of script. The stone kindly suggests pacing yourself. Delhi multiplies. Siri's earthworks hold the wind. Tughlakabad squats on a rocky outcrop like a crouched cat. Jahanpana tries to gather the earlier cities into one long embrace. Firozabad threads palaces and pillars beside the Yamuna. You pace their gates at twilight and feel 7 different heartbeats in the same body. In narrow lanes, sweet sellers bargain with soldiers. In wider avenues, elephants carry howdahs that sway with slow authority. Gardens, rectangles of shade and water, are drawn like prayers you can walk through. They will later mature into the full Persian Shahar Bagh, but already you sense the taste for order. Rills, pools, cypresses, fruit. Courts glitter, and rules harden. Under the Khaljis, Aladdin's market reforms fix prices for grain, cloth, and essentials. Inspectors haunt bazaars the way cats haunt dairies. You attempt a bit of sly haggling and immediately meet a clerk with a tablet who smiles like a man who knows yesterday's prices by heart. Mongol raids test the city walls and lose. Armorers sleep well. Under the Tughlaqs, ambition grows mercurial. Muhammad bin Tughlaq pictures a second capital at Dawlatabad and orders a migration that turns into a parable about maps outrunning feet. He experiments with token currency and learns, the hard way, how quickly brass coins can impersonate each other. One gentle aside for your pillow. Even brilliant plans need small print and patient edges. Ibn Battuta arrives with his notebook and a taste for stories. He finds judges, poets, Sufis, and spies trading anecdotes in the same afternoon. You step into a khanqa, a Sufi lodge where the air smells of lentils and sandalwood. Someone is singing the verses of Amir Khusrau, whose ear makes bridges, Hindavi and Persian, village tune and courtly song. A circle of singers warms to Qawwali, claps rise like doves. Historians still wonder which musical forms owe their birth directly to Khusrau and which ripened later under many hands. The genealogy of songs is less a family tree than a banyan with generous roots, but the feeling is certain. Conversation between worlds can become music. Not far away, a woman climbs a low platform to judge petitions, Razia, daughter of Iltutmish, taking up the work of rule with calm shoulders and a rider's seat. Her tenure is brief but luminous, a reminder that even in armored centuries the script leaves room for a different hand. In the lanes, Turks, Afghans, Persians, and locals share recipes and idioms. Bakers learn to coax yeast into soft breads. Scribes teach a new word to an old proverb and smile at the fit. A symbolic tidbit lingers at thresholds. The pierced stone screen, the jolly, cools air, scatters light, and gives privacy without silence. You sit behind one at noon, watching the world turned into lace. Beyond the capital, the map is a quilt of powers. Gujarat, Bengal, Malwa, and the Bahmani Deccan braid and unbraid alliances. The coastal ports we loved keep shipping pepper and poetry regardless. To the south, the Vijayanagara kings raise their own granite honeycombs on the Tungabhadra, their Gopurams talking to the sun. Traders and dancers commute easily between sultanate towns and riverine capitals. Historians still wonder whether we should call this period a clean cultural shift, or a constant negotiation, 1,000 daily accommodations in which law, land, and lineage learn to shake hands. Architecture thickens into a new grammar. True arches replace corbel tricks. Domes rest on squinches. Battered walls lean inward with Tughlaq pragmatism. Later, the Lodis plant garden tombs like quiet drums on Delhi's plain. You trace Kufik and Nask, lotus and vine, on the same lintel. The stone doesn't flinch. Waterworks matter more than headlines. Firoz Shah channels canals, repairs pillars, dots the city with baolis, stepwells where noon becomes evening by the time you reach the last stair. You descend one, savoring the temperature fall and the geometry of shadows. A boy leaps 2 steps at a time and surfaces laughing, proof that gravity has exceptions. Language grows hybrid out of sheer neighborliness. Court Persian handles decrees. Bizarre Hindavi negotiates cloth. Sanskrit pundits argue metaphysics under neem shade. Scribes note that vernaculars behave like rivers in monsoon, merging, separating, leaving silt in each other's beds. A shop sign mixes scripts with cheerful confidence. A poet rhymes dill with man and refuses to apologize for the blend. You remember our earliest fires and epics and feel no betrayal, only another verse in the same long song. In quieter rooms, coins pool like moonlight. The silver tanka carries the sultan's titles. Copper jatals pass through more hands than epics do. Guilds recalibrate. Caravan schedules learn new toll houses. A judge quotes the law and then leans toward equity because late carts and sick children have never read the statute book. Not everything softens. Campaigns move south. Forts change flags. Taxes bite. Temples and monasteries suffer in some places, adapt in others. Historians still wonder how to balance chronicles, often written to praise or condemn, with archaeology's slower, steadier testimony. You learn to hold both, the wound and the scar tissue, the loss and the new growth. Evenings in Delhi can feel like rehearsals for forever. A breeze slips off the river. Parakeets argue bedtime policies in peoples. The call to prayer floats from a minaret and is answered, half a mile away, by a conch from a small shrine. Someone lights a clay lamp on a stepwell ledge. The flame threads the dark like a needle. A soft aside. You vow to watch the moon reflected in every pool tonight. 5 pools later you concede that sleep is also a form of devotion. Remember Ashoka's pillars speaking ethics in public? Here, edicts turn into habits. A langar pot steaming in a lodge for any hungry stranger. A garden laid out not just for prestige but for shade and rest. A magistrate pausing, before a sentence, to ask about flood levels and prices of grain. The best politics, you realize, often looks like maintenance done kindly. By the time Lodis plant their tombs in gardens, the ground is already trembling with hoofbeats from beyond the Khyber. A Timurid prince will soon read this landscape as invitation. Domes to echo, gardens to regularize, a throne to reimagine under a different sky. But that belongs to our next doorway. For now, you linger under a jolly shadow, patterns drifting across your hands like cool water, while the many Delhis hum together, Siri and Firozabad, Tughlakabad and Jahanpana, like strings tuned to slightly different notes that somehow make one chord. You step back through the gate and look once more at the Minar, calligraphy lifting even stone into breath. The night is tender, the road south still warm from the day, and the city behind you carries on. Prices checked, songs traded, wells descending into their private evenings. When you turn toward the next bend, you're not leaving, you're bringing the echo with you. Arches, gardens, music, and the practiced art of living together in a house with many rooms. You step from the garden tombs of the Lodis into a dawn bright enough to redraw a map. Hooves drum across the Panipat plain, the smoke of artillery hangs low, and the wind seems to hold its breath for a heartbeat that lasts centuries. When it exhales, a new house is standing. A key fact steadies the horizon for you. In 1526, Babur wins the first battle of Panipat, and the Mughal line plants its first firm tent peg in the north. You taste the dust of gunpowder empires, Ottoman, Safavid, Mughal, each learning to yoke cannon to cavalry and ambition to geometry. Babur keeps a diary the way some keep a garden. In its pages you hear a man who loves hillside breezes, tulips after rain, and a terrace where fruit is cold and water is near. He lays out Sharbagh gardens in the plains, 4-quartered, cross-axial, water coursing like script, so that paradise, promised in texts, can be rehearsed on earth. You follow the rills with your fingertips, and they answer with a small music that feels curated for sleep. A soft aside. You tell yourself you're just inspecting hydraulics, not falling in love with a garden. The cypresses are unconvinced. Power sways for a moment. Humayun loses, wanders, studies Persian grace up close, and returns with allies and a new polish in his step. His resting place in Delhi, raised by Haji Begum, shows you tomorrow's grammar. Red sandstone breathing beneath white marble, a dome that will teach domes how to be patient, a garden that treats silence as a guest. Persianate craft, Indian stone, and the subcontinent's habit of making neighbors out of strangers meet here on equal terms. You stand in the shade and feel a century learning to spell its name. Akbar arrives like steadiness set to a drum. Fatehpur Sikri rises from a ridge, a red city with purpose in its pores, palaces, courts, a Friday mosque drawn like a compass. In the Abadat Khana, he invites scholars to argue gently across faiths, Brahmins and Jesuits, Sufis and Jains, each polishing the air with thought. He tightens administration through the Mansabdari ranks, reforms land revenue under Todar Mal's calm arithmetic, and, another anchoring fact, he abolishes the jizya tax on non-Muslims in 1564, then keeps testing a broader ethic of sulh-i-kul, peace with all. Historians still wonder whether his much-whispered din-i-ilahi was a new religion or simply a courtly code for a few trusted souls. Either way, you can feel the center of gravity move from dogma to conversation. The workshops, karkhanas, hum like well-tuned hives. Painters team up panel by panel. One hand draws, another colors, a third lays gold leaf thin as breath. The Hamzanama gallops across huge sheets with heroes leaping from page to page. Later, in Jahangir's time, the brush learns to watch a bird so carefully you can count the feathers. You pause over a margin where a squirrel climbs a painted branch and confess a small aside. If you were a miniature painter, you would spend 3 days painting one whisker and be very proud of yourself. The Ostad smiles without looking up and adds 5 more whiskers while you're blinking. Music learns a new address at court. Tansen sings, and lamps are rumored to light, skies to darken, monsoon to be persuaded. You were content with something simpler, a raga that lands like a slow tide and takes your pulse with it when it goes. In another hall, scholars translate the Mahabharata into Persian, the Razamnama, so that epics we heard under Banyans earlier can walk in a new wardrobe. Jaroka Darshan, the emperor's morning appearance at a window, turns politics into a ritual of mutual recognition. Ruler seen, people acknowledged, son witnessed. Jahangir takes the pen like a lens. In the Tuak-i Jahangiri, he notes the tint of a leaf, the habit of a heron, a justice chain hung for petitioners to tug at the palace gate. Nur Jahan, empress and partner, signs farmans, curates perfumes, and sets fashions with a wrist's turn. In ateliers, Ostad Mansur paints cranes so exact you almost hear them step. Gardens widen north and west. Shalimar in Kashmir pours terraces downward like a fountain that forgot to stop. Symbol clicks softly into place. In Pietra Dura and inlay you start to notice lotus and cypress, life unfolding and uprightness enduring, a small duet across marble. Then Shah Jahan draws with light. Shah Jahanabad, Old Delhi reborn, rises in arcs and axes, the red fort like a box for music, the Jama Masjid holding stairs for thousands of breaths at once. Downriver, a tomb opens like a hush. The Taj Mahal, begun in the 1630s and completed around 1653, asks the Yamuna to keep its mirror polished. Marble skin drinks dawn and returns it as rose. By noon it turns to milk. Under moonlight it remembers to be silver. You try to count the Pietra Dura blossoms, carnelian, jasper, lapis, onyx, then wisely stop before the guards invite you to a lifetime membership in still counting things. A soft aside, diplomatic. If minimalism has an opinion here, it is outvoted by grace. The peacock throne shimmers with an extravagance that will one day tempt a conqueror's hand far from here. At court, nostalgic calligraphy loosens into elegance. At the river, weavers tie knots into carpets like patient weather. In bazaars, cottons flow outward, so admired abroad that calico and muslin become global actors. Between palace and port, a new idiom thickens in the air. Hindavi touched by Persian cadence, on its way to being called Urdu, a camp language that grows a library. Aurangzeb inherits not a room but a continent of rooms. He pushes south, past river and fort, into the Deccan stone and thorn. The map swells and frays at the same time. Logistics grow long legs. Accounts lose their way. He reimposes jizya in 1679, trims some courtly arts, and leans hard on law as he reads it. Yet even under sternness, life refuses to become monochrome. Kitabkhana copies Qurans luminous as lanterns. Karkhanas still turn wood to wonder. Somewhere a sitar's ancestor murmurs after midnight. Historians still wonder whether his choices were mostly doctrinal, mostly pragmatic, or simply the grammar of governing a realm stretched beyond its breadth. Outside the palaces, other drums learn to answer. Maratha cavalry write zigzags across the Deccan. In Punjab, Sikh communities frame courage in new forms. In Bengal, riverine wealth hums with Europeans knocking politely and then less politely at factory doors. Decline, when it comes, does not fall like a curtain. It comes as a series of creases, fiscal strain, factions at court, regional powers choosing themselves, and, in 1739, the long, cold shadow of Nadir Shah's raid, when the peacock throne itself is carted away like a sentence with the verb removed. You keep the picture soft for sleep. What matters is knowing that an empire can be most fragile at its most glittering. Still, the splendor is not a mirage. Walk under a jolly screen and feel how marble makes shade into lace. Step in a sharbah and notice how water persuades heat to be kind. Read a Farman's Curve and see administration presented as art. The symbolic tidbit you pocket for later is simple. The cypress and lotus pairing, steadfastness and unfolding, an instruction whispered in stone about how to stand and how to grow. You think of earlier chapters, Ashoka's pillars speaking ethics aloud, Gupta scholars teaching zero to sing, ports timing prayer to wind, and realize the Mughal mode is the art of synthesis, Persianate line, Indic color, Central Asian garden sense, Deccan stonecraft, Rajput valor, Sufi hospitality, Bhakti warmth. It does not erase difference. It rehearses a way for differences to sit at the same table and complement the cook. A soft aside. You, for one, are available to compliment any cook who sends a mango your way. Akbar's orchards have ruined your standards for sweetness. Evening falls in Shahjahanabad. The Red Fort's walls keep the day's heat like a memory. The bazaar outside Chandni Chowk blinks its lamps. A call to prayer threads with a temple bell, familiars breathing by now. Far away, factories flying foreign flags make notes in ledgers that will turn into plans. Nearer, a copyist blows gently on fresh gold to set it. You sit at the base of a fountain and watch the water choose every path at once. Remember the stepwell where noon became evening in 3 flights of stairs? You descend again, this time inside history itself, watching the Mughal line water the roots of language, music, architecture, and administration, even as branches tangle with weather. When you rise, the air has changed. Colonial shadows lengthen at coasts and river mouths. Forts that began as warehouses clear their throats. But for tonight, you keep the splendor and the strife in one frame, the domes, the edicts, the songs, the sums, and you walk on, quietly, toward the next turning of the road. You follow the river past Mughal garden walls and watch the skyline change, domes thinning into chimneys, palace courtyards giving way to bastions squared for cannon. Warehouses squat beside wharves like patient animals, and over their doors a curious word repeats, factory. Not smoke and gears, but counting houses run by factors, those careful merchants who make fortunes move by columns of ink. You step into the cool shade of one and hear cloth whisper as bales are opened, pepper click into jars, ledgers thrum under quick fingers. A soft aside. You try to look like you understand double-entry bookkeeping. The clerk's smile suggests he's seen better performances from the office cat. Outposts multiply along 3 coasts. At Surat the early company bows to local winds. Farther south, Bombay's harbor learns to cradle ship after ship. On the Coromandel, Fort St. George lifts its crenellations above Madras. In the east, Fort William shoulders up beside the Hooghly and watches Calcutta grow from marsh and idea. The French unfurl their silks at Pondicherry. Dutch factors keep tidy books in hugging ports. Danes and Portuguese leave smaller signatures along the sand. The shore becomes a chessboard, and everyone thinks they play white. A key fact steadies your step. In 1757, at Plassey, company forces under Robert Clive defeat the Nawab of Bengal. The event is small on the map, mangroves, monsoon breath, but large in consequence. 2 years later, at Buxar, the company wins again. By 1765, the Mughal emperor grants the Diwani of Bengal rights to collect revenue. You listen as the word trader quietly adds tax collector, and with that, the mood of the room changes. Weights and measures still matter, but now so do harvest registers and the width of canals. You walk the new offices, rooms of paper discipline. Surveyors unroll maps. Revenue officers weigh seed and promise. Interpreters drift between languages like boats between banks. In Bengal, the permanent settlement of 1793 fixes revenue in exchange for landlord pledges. Estates multiply, and village lives settle into a different arithmetic. Historians still wonder whether this stabilized cultivation and fostered improvement, or whether it trapped cultivators beneath the shadow of fixed demands and absentee hopes. You run a finger along a boundary line and notice how straight ink can be on paper when fields, rivers, and families are not. Beyond the delta, campaigns pull you like rope. Mysore, under Haidar Ali and Tipu Sultan, leans hard against company walls. Rockets arc with theatrical hiss. Treaties punctuate breath. Anglo-Maratha wars redraw the Deccan's quilt, and alliances braid and unbraid with the speed of monsoon squalls. Governor-General Wellesley's subsidiary alliance system tucks British troops into Indian states for protection. The bill folded politely into the end. Later, Dalhousie's doctrine of lapse claims territories when heirs do not fit British law. Maps sharpen into larger blocks, and silence sharpens in royal courts. A soft aside to keep you breathing. If you're feeling overwhelmed by acronyms of power, you can imagine every treaty stamped with a sleepy clerk's sigh. It helps a little. Factories fill with different cargo. Cotton cloth still moves, but opium and indigo now stain the ledger blue. The company sells opium to China. Tea drifts back along the same sea lanes to London cups. In Bengal and Bihar, planters fix crop patterns to dye the world's clothes. Vats bubble like indigo moons, and laborers' hands remember the color long after washing. You stand on a bund between flooded fields and watch sky and water trade places. Ethical questions rustle like wind in the cane. Profit is a quick walker. Duty a slower one that insists on company. Then a new sound, iron on iron, faint at first, then insistent as a metronome. In 1853, a small miracle, the first passenger train in India runs from Bombay to Thane. Crowds line the track as if watching a comet choose to live among them. Soon telegraph poles stitch horizons, taut wires humming like a vast instrument you can almost tune with your fingertips. Post offices learn a firm handwriting. Steamships practice punctuality and demand everyone else do the same. Historians still wonder whether these technologies were gifts carrying modernity into every village or simply clever instruments of extraction. Rails built for cotton and soldiers, wires for orders. You sit with the ambivalence and let it breathe. Inside forts, routine acquires its own religion. Drums call the watch. Bugles tilt dawn into duty. Drill grounds print the day's steps into dust. Sepoys in neat ranks shoulder muskets. British officers practice command that sometimes forgets to be listening. In bazaar lanes just beyond the walls, life loops on. A beetle vendor arranges green triangles like flat leaves of time. A potter's wheel hums out circles. A boy flings a kite into Hooghly breeze and trusts it to find the sky's soft places. A symbolic tidbit glows at the river bend. The great banyan in Calcutta's botanical garden. Branches so many they become trunks. Looks like an empire of shade built out of one living intention. Under its gossiping leaves, you realize networks can comfort or control depending on who carries the rope. The company governs by paper and parade. Regulations thicken. Courts speak the language of codified law. Persian recedes in chancery. English advances alongside vernaculars that keep their own schools of elegance. Missionaries argue for reform with zeal that occasionally forgets tact. Indian reformers publish tracts of their own, weighing scripture against conscience, custom against reason. The printing press turns afternoons into publics. A soft aside. You promise yourself you won't collect every pamphlet. 3 minutes later your arms are full and you are bargaining for a cloth bag. Beyond the offices, weather walks history into rooms. The Bengal famine of 1770 belongs to this century's long ledger too. Archives remember it with numbers, travelers with sorrow. We soften our gaze for sleep, but you still sense the lesson. Governance is never only coin and command. It is grain, rain, and the humility to admit when your model does not know a monsoon by heart. In quieter registers, the great trigonometrical survey lays chains and theodolites across ridges, measuring a subcontinent into degrees and seconds. Mapmakers argue in pencil over how to straighten a curve without lying to it. You cross India again on the new rails. Stations breathe coal and chai. A vendor hands you a clay kulhar cup you set down to return to earth, a small ritual against the haste of machines. In one carriage, a scholar mutters Sanskrit. In the next, a merchant calculates yarn. In the guard's van, a goat contemplates philosophy with flawless composure. You smile, grateful the goat isn't in charge of the schedule. Then again, goats often manage crowds better than timetables do. Meanwhile, the old armies learn new worries. Cartridges need biting. Rumors travel faster than orders. Religious scruples meet bureaucratic indifference and make sparks. Pay, promotion, pride, and prayer tangle in the same barracks room. In cantonments, drums beat a little tighter, whispers draw a little closer. You feel the air thicken with the weight of a year about to be named in full. The sort of year that will need its own section because it changes how bedtime stories are told and to whom they belong. Remember our earlier roads, the Uttarapatha wind of Iron Age carts, the tree-shaded highways of Mauryan careers, the Gupta scholars carrying zero in neat columns, the monsoon lanes of pepper and song? All of them gather here in the company's century and are taught to march in step to a different drummer. Some days the new rhythm feels efficient. Some days it feels like someone set the metronome too fast and lost the music. You keep time with your breath instead. Evening falls over Calcutta's riverfront. Hooghly water holds sunset like a polished bowl. A bell clangs far down at the Ghats. A steamer's whistle answers with a melancholy that somehow feels busy. In a bungalow veranda, a civil servant writes home about the heat and the kindness of strangers. In a narrow lane, a poet sketches a satire that will sail around town before dawn. In a sepoy line, someone fingers a charm and exhales the worry of 100 orders into the night. Lamps climb the great banyan's shadows. The telegraph wire sings a single note across miles. A ledger closes like a book that intends to be believed. You rise, turn toward the cantonments, and feel the floorboards of history tremble lightly beneath your feet, the way a train does before it starts, the way a crowd does before it speaks. The forts and factories have arranged the stage, the instruments are tuned, the cue is in the air. When it comes, it will be loud, not to keep you awake, but to teach the next part of the lullaby with a drum you cannot ignore. The rails you rode in Section 12 begin to hum with a different energy. Letters passed hand to hand, prayers threaded through meetings, rumors folding into resolve. Cantonment drums beat time, and one night in 1857 a fuse finds dry tinder. At Meerut the spark leaps. By morning, barracks are no longer only barracks but crossroads, and you feel the plains tighten with the sound of feet and hooves. Historians still wonder whether this upsurge is best read as a mutiny over greased cartridges, as a wider peasant and princely revolt against new economies and laws, or as the first broad war for independence. From your quiet vantage, you sense all three winds gusting at once: faith stung, livelihoods pinched, pride roused. In the old Mughal city of Delhi, the past is asked to bless the future. Bahadur Shah Zafar, poet-emperor in twilight, becomes a symbol larger than his frail court. Sepoys bow to him because sometimes a flag needs a heartbeat. Elsewhere, Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi rides into 100 songs, and Awad's talukdars discover their voices again. You keep the edges soft. Battles skim past like distant thunder. Yet you hear the key fact that reshapes the century. By 1858, after months of fierce and uneven struggle, the East India Company is dissolved, and the Crown takes direct rule. The ledger becomes law. The company's Raj becomes the British Raj, and its paperwork grows more elaborate even as its posture stiffens. A new kind of politics wakes in drawing rooms and schoolyards. In 1885, the Indian National Congress gathers in Bombay, lawyers and teachers, editors and administrators, testing how to speak for a subcontinent without raising a sword. Resolutions read like careful bridges, Indianization of services, more seats in councils, budgets that listen to grain. Moderates hold the pen. Extremists sharpen it. Both practice a public that is still learning which voice belongs to whom. A soft aside. You try to keep up with factions and end up making a mental spreadsheet. Your pillow politely asks you to format it tomorrow. Bengal is split in 1905. Administrative, say the files. Strategic, say the pamphlets. Calcutta's coffeehouses and village porches answer with Swadeshi, home-produced cloth, salt, soap, and boycotts that turn market stalls into classrooms. You watch someone light a tiny stove in a courtyard to boil dye, then hang a freshly woven strand of khadi like a small flag. A cultural tidbit glows under the veranda lamp. The charkha, the spinning wheel, returns as both tool and emblem, work that is quiet, stubborn, and contagious. You attempt 5 minutes of spinning, the thread breaks, and so does your pride. The weaver gives you the kind smile reserved for earnest beginners and adjusts your fingers. New leaders step forward, and old words find new meanings. Bal Gangadhar Tilak's newspapers rouse afternoons. Gopal Krishna Gokhale's speeches move budgets like chess pieces. Poets give songs to crowds. Vande Mataram, flowing from lungs that have learned to stand straight in public squares. In 1909, Morley Minto reforms open more council seats but also divide representation by community. The knife of concession has two edges. Historians still wonder whether separate electorates were an earnest accommodation of diversity or a divide that would later deepen rivers already running in the soil. World War I thins wallets and crowds cities with uniforms. Indian soldiers, from mountains and coasts, step into trenches far away and send letters home that read like rain, ordinary and astonishing. War promises reform at its close. What arrives was more complicated. The Rowlatt Acts in 1919, preventive detention by signature. In Amritsar's Jallianwala Bagh on April 13th, a peaceful gathering is trapped and fired upon. Numbers vary by record, but grief needs no calculation. You keep your voice gentle, the garden falls silent in you. Afterward, Rabindranath Tagore returns his knighthood. Some kinds of honor weigh more than some kinds of title. From Sabarmati in 1930, a slight man with a staff begins to walk. He dips his hand into the sea at Dandi and lifts salt, common as tears, universal as need, and the Raj discovers that a pinch of crystal can be heavier than a cannon. The key fact here is simple enough to hold. The Salt March covers about 240 miles in 24 days, and the civil disobedience that follows teaches a continent how to refuse without striking. Gandhi calls it satyagraha, truth force, and towns learn its grammar. Break unjust laws publicly, accept arrest quietly, keep your heart from hardening. You practice nonviolence with a mosquito that visits your ear at bedtime. The experiment fails. You bow to greater souls. Spinning becomes habit. Khadi becomes uniform. The charkha climbs into the center of a flag. Boycott and picket mix with prayer and song. Village women organize kitchens and whisper strategies more effective than shouted slogans. All the while, other roads of courage run beside Gandhi's. Bhagat Singh and his comrades argue that a shock to the system can awaken a sleeping public. Subhas Chandra Bose will later take a more militant path, forming the Indian National Army abroad. Historians still wonder how to measure these strands. How much the Raj yielded to moral pressure at home, to wartime calculation abroad, to economic fatigue, to the combined insistence of many tactics braided tight. You learn to let the answer be plural. Conferences convene in London drawing rooms. Pens uncap over tea. The Government of India Act of 1935 becomes the longest statute on your bedside table, promising provincial elections and a federation that limps on paper. In 1937, Congress ministries take office in several provinces and practice the unglamorous art of roads and schools. In Muslim League gatherings, Muhammad Ali Jinnah crafts a platform that hardens questions of representation into lines that will not easily blur again. Somewhere, a schoolboy copies both names into his notebook and underlines them twice. A soft aside. Your own school notebook once had more underlining than text. The habit is apparently ancient. Then the world goes to war again. Troops move, prices yawn, ships vanish into gray weather. The Raj declares India belligerent without asking Indian leaders first, a reminder of who still signs in what ink. The Bengal famine of 1943 hovers at the edge of our candlelight. Grain tight, boats confiscated, markets panicked. We keep details soft for sleep, but the lesson remains. Logistics must remember human hunger or they are only clever diagrams. The Quit India movement of 1942 asks plainly, do or die. Leaders are jailed. Crowds learn to act without headliners. Protests climb telegraph poles and derail schedules. The state replies with lathies and warrants. Meanwhile, Bose takes the INA to Imphal's rim. Defeat comes, but the optic is different now. Trials of INA officers in Delhi will stir sympathies across communities that had begun to sleep apart. Historians still wonder whether the war's end, Britain's exhaustion, America's new voice, and the Soviet shadow were decisive, or whether the ground in India itself had already slipped far enough that the center could no longer hold. You let geopolitics pass like a large, slow cloud and keep your eye on smaller, certain things. A woman selling salt without a license, a clerk refusing to leave a march even when his shoes decide to retire. Through it all, symbols accumulate like prayer beads. The spinning wheel in homes turns poverty into patience and patience into politics. The walking stick becomes a metronome for 1,000,000 feet. The tricolor, saffron, white, green, with the wheel at its heart, quietly rehearses a nation that does not yet legally exist. You meet a student painting that wheel by lamplight, careful with each spoke. He yawns, blows on the paint, and falls asleep on a book about budgets. Every freedom needs a treasurer. By the mid-1940s, the horizon is crowded with arrivals, letters from prison, cables from London, rumors from the front, songs from villages, editorials with polite fury. You remember Ashoka's pillars, the Gupta numerals, the monsoon charts, the arches and stepwells, the sharbas and kawals, and realize how long the groundwork has been laid for a house sturdy enough to argue without collapsing. The old banyan of our story feels close. 100 roots have touched earth and become trunks. Some roots now tug in different directions. The shade still wants to be one. Evening draws its hand across the map. A lantern wobbles in a village courtyard. A jail cell finds its own kind of quiet. A railway platform hums with soldiers returning to lives that no longer fit. A lawyer folds his spectacles and admits, gently, that the case has become larger than the courtroom. Somewhere a hand-lettered poster curls at the corners. Leave India. Somewhere else, a teacher ties a Rakhi on a colleague's wrist and refuses to let difference become distance. You breathe in, breathe out, and feel the chapter's last sentence arrive without fanfare. The day after this one will carry flags and lines. We will walk into it together, careful as people crossing a river in the dark. The day after that tense twilight arrives with flags and lines, cloth climbing masts, ink crossing maps. You hear footsteps before speeches, neighbors sweeping thresholds, children peeking from doorways, a tailor smoothing a tricolor that still smells faintly of dye. Near midnight in Delhi, a new prime minister lifts his voice about an old civilization waking to freedom. At the same hour in Karachi, another founder reads a pledge of duty. 2 lights, 2 dawns, 1 subcontinent learning to breathe in 2 rooms at once. A key fact to hold gently: India becomes independent on August 15, 1947, and Pakistan on August 14, 1947. The calendar is crisp. The hours are ceremonial. The streets are complicated. The Radcliffe Line, hurried across Punjab and Bengal by a judge new to the land, tries to turn history into geometry. Rivers arch their brows at straight edges. Railway tracks, suddenly foreign in both directions, blink in surprise. A soft aside. You attempt to fold a neatly printed map. It unfolds itself again like a stubborn newspaper, reminding you paper is patient but people are not. Trains that once carried pepper and poetry now carry families. Caravans roll, bullock carts swaying under trunks that sound hollow because some things cannot be packed. Stations become crossroads of memory. Platforms turn into temporary towns. You walk the edge and feel the air change. Kettles hissing for strangers, hands passing cups, soldiers pacing in pairs, rumors moving faster than timetables. Camp kitchens bang pots into order. Volunteers rig tents from saris and rope. Doctors stitch the day closed, 1 wound at a time. We keep the details soft for sleep, but we do not look away. Numbers of dead and displaced vary across records, but the sorrow is beyond counting. and the silence that follows is one of history's larger rooms. In Calcutta, Gandhi walks alleys with quiet sandals, fasting and persuading, his voice a thread that tries to stitch a city back to itself. In Noakhali and elsewhere, he chooses small courtyards over podiums, prayer meetings less to preach than to remind. He seems smaller this year and also larger. You notice how his frail steps outweigh speeches. In Delhi, Sardar Patel works with a ledger of states, coaxing princes and councils toward accession, crafting a federation from dozens of signatures in a tone that suggests the door is open. And also, let us be clear, the door will soon close. Historians still wonder whether partition was inevitable after decades of communal politics and constitutional puzzles, or whether a slower, different route might have spared lives. They wonder too whether the hasty timetable made grief inevitable. The questions sit beside you like two tired travelers, unsatisfied and awake. Mid-August evenings learn a new ritual. Lamps arrive in windows. A flag breathes on a terrace. A grandmother insists on sweets, because freedom should taste like something. You look up at the saffron, white, and green and see a symbol we met long ago, Ashoka's wheel. The Ashoka chakra, 24 spokes, turns at the flag's heart, law, effort, motion, reminding a newborn state that Dharma is not a sermon but a practice. A cultural tidbit stays warm in your palm. Some early flags were woven of khadi drawn by hand, thread humming like a low song. To this day, a crisp cotton tricolor can sound like applause when it lifts. Borders keep rearranging routines. In Kashmir, a Maharaja hesitates, then signs a paper of accession as armed men test passes. The chill of mountains meets the heat of paperwork, and snow remembers every boot print. In Hyderabad, a princely court argues with the idea of union until 1948 makes the argument moot. In the Northeast and Northwest, new checkpoints learn how to ask questions with mercy. Historians still wonder how to apportion responsibility among leaders, crowds, and empire. Whether promises were too many or too few. Whether words hardened into walls because fear got there first. You listen, and you let the uncertainty breathe, because sometimes the most honest sentence you can offer the past is a careful comma. The Constituent Assembly sits late into nights that feel like long monsoon evenings, paper soft with humidity, teacups rehearsing tiny constellations on saucers. A committee led by B.R. Ambedkar sorts rights from wishes, procedure from poetry, and keeps putting the dignity of the last person in line at the top of the page. You hear debates about federalism, language, justice, and the promise that untouchability, this old wound, must be outlawed without hesitation. A soft aside, you try to follow every clause and realize constitutions are like stepwells, simple from above, but deeper the farther you go. Best to descend with steady feet and an occasional guide. Meanwhile, cities learn new accents overnight. Lahore, Delhi, Amritsar, Dhaka. Each opens schools and closes streets, receives neighbors and says goodbye to friends, and discovers that grief and generosity can share the same courtyard. Sikh langar halls feed strangers until the pots shine with ware. Muslim artisans carry tools across new lines and set up shop by sunrise. Hindu families rebuild kitchens using recipes brought in memory. A banyan we used for stories becomes a canopy for lists. Who is missing? Who arrived? Who needs a blanket tonight? The tree's roots, parted, look for earth and find it. You drift along a night train. Compartments breathe like lungs. A policeman's lantern makes a moving moon on corrugated tin. Someone hums a lullaby that pretends it is for the child but is mostly for the adult singing. In another carriage, two men compare papers and realize they once bought spices from each other. A pause, a smile, and a small exchange of addresses that may never be used and will still do some kind of work. The rail whistles. You remember our first iron tracks in Section 12 and the caravans and monsoon routes in Section 9. Motion remains the subcontinent's oldest craft. Flags climb more masts. On January 26, 1950, the Constitution will come into force and the Republic begin. This we will soon reach, but tonight you are still in that first year when freedom feels both vast and fragile, like a new clay pot that needs holding with two hands. Courts open under new names, postage stamps get new emblems, schoolchildren learn new dates and keep the old songs. A teacher chalks "citizen" on a blackboard and waits an extra second, because the word tastes different when it is yours. You collect small symbols the way some collect coins. A child pressing a wheel of chalk on the lane until a pale ring appears. Practice for democracy. A clerk drawing a careful line through a colonial insignia and replacing it with the lion capital. Practice for memory. A railway guard raising a green flag that has no politics, only a timetable. Practice for mercy. A rickshaw bell that sounds like a temple bell by accident and is forgiven. Practice for living together. We keep 2 or 3 gentle jokes to soften edges. You promise your notebook you'll track every new committee. The notebook replies it has its own committee on margins. You attempt to learn the lyrics of both new anthems. The high notes set respectful limits. You try to fold your tricolor perfectly. The cloth suggests that perfection is not the point, that steady hands and honest wind are. Night spreads a calmer blue. Across new frontiers, radios murmur lullabies of nationhood, sometimes stately, sometimes off-key, always earnest. You sit in a courtyard that was, last year, a different jurisdiction, and realize the moon requires no visa. A cow sighs in its sleep. A stray dog takes up a post with no orders. Somewhere, a pair of elders, one who stayed, one who arrived, argue kindly about the best mango. This is how countries become real, not just in assemblies and borders, but in arguments about fruit, in shared bus shelters during sudden rain, in the way a borrowed cup comes back washed. Remember the wheel on Ashoka's pillars, the banyan that became a library, the stepwells where noon turned to evening, the Sharba rills, the ports that spoke 3 languages before breakfast? They are all here, still teaching. The wheel keeps time on a flag. The banyan keeps the register. The stepwell becomes the Constitution, descending into rights and duties. The rills become institutions, quiet and persistent. The ports remind the land to keep doors open. You breathe with them, slow and steady. Tomorrow we will step into the Republic's long walk. Votes like monsoon, dams like new hills, satellites like traveling lamps, and 1,000 languages finding one desk to share. For now, you rest in the doorway between sorrow and possibility, hearing both and choosing not to leave either behind. The night is kind. The map stops rustling. The flag settles as if the wind itself decided to sleep. You wake beneath a sky busy with kites and radio waves, and the wheel we've been following turns once more into law. On January 26, 1950, India's constitution comes into force. The republic begins, and a long, careful breath fills the room. In schoolyards, children practice the pledge. In courtrooms, a new crest, a quartet of lions from Ashoka's capital, takes the wall. You trace the motto with your eyes, Satyameva Jayate, truth alone triumphs, and feel how old stone and new paper shake hands. Polling booths bloom like monsoon lilies. In 1951-52, the first general election moves across mountains and mangroves, deserts and islands, a choreography of ink and patience. A key fact settles gently in your palm. It is the largest democratic vote the world has seen to that date. A cultural tidbit glows too. The indelible ink mark on the finger, a tiny purple moon that says, "You have spoken." You smile at your reflection in a bucket lid. One soft aside, no matter how sleepy you are, you will not rub that mark off on the pillow. Trains carry ballot boxes. Bullock carts cross streams. Boats idle at ghats till the last voter arrives. In Parliament, voices braid, fluent, accented, sometimes quarrelsome, often steady. The map itself learns to speak more clearly, In 1956, the state's reorganization decants linguistic communities into new borders, a reminder that tongues are also homes. Historians still wonder whether this was a masterstroke of accommodation or a preface to more claims. You hold both possibilities like two weights that balance the same scale. Rice ripened under new science. The Green Revolution sends seeds, fertilizer, and irrigation into fields. Farmers learn to read rainfall and policy with equal care. Granaries swell, meals steady, debt worries do not disappear. In cities, steel plants flare like cautious suns. Dams pour concrete into valleys and pour electricity into nights. You recall our stepwells where noon became evening. Now turbines make their own twilight, and villages glow. Foreign policy moves with a measured gait. Non-alignment is a kind of spine, not a fence sit, but a habit of self-respect, though the world keeps tugging sleeves. Wars come and go. 1962 in the mountains, 1965 on the plains, 1971 in the east with a new nation born. You keep the details soft and let the lessons stay. Borders are not chalk lines but lived edges. In 1975 to 77, the emergency tightens the air. Papers fold their voices. Some rights go quiet and then return. Historians still wonder whether those years are best read as a cautionary tale about power's appetite or a stress test that taught institutions their own bones. You note how courts, press, and voters remember the feeling and keep better watch. Meanwhile, the sky is learning names. In 1975, Aryabhata rides a rocket and India joins the Satellite Club. Launch by launch, a quiet agency builds a loud resume. Rockets with gentle acronyms, SLV, PSLV, GSLV, draw white comets over the coast. In 2013, a small, clever craft, Mongolian, reaches Mars on a budget modest enough to earn 1,000 headlines. In 2023, Chandrayaan-3 lands near the moon's south, and a billion breaths catch, then smile. A symbolic tidbit slips into your pocket. A coconut broken at a launch pad. One old ritual waving at the newest math. Both wish the machine a safe journey. In 1991, doors open. Licenses thin, tariffs fall, markets learn a faster tempo. The rupee finds new grammar. The software industry turns code into exportable calm. Bengaluru hums. Hyderabad blinks like a motherboard at night. A million small firms thread the bazaar into the global weave. Historians still wonder whether liberalization was the only path or simply the chosen one. They debate how much growth owed to policy, how much to an older entrepreneurial muscle flexing at last. You keep the argument gentle, because families run on both enterprise and empathy. Cities widen their belts. Metro rails purr underground. Flyovers arc over flyovers. Chai finds a second youth in paper cups and steel tumblers. Cinema keeps telling its long, industrious dream. Music breeds new branches. Cricket turns into a season and then a calendar of its own. The diaspora loops back. Airports become family rooms where hugs ignore time zones. In kitchens, pressure cookers sigh. In courtyards, rangoli and kolam settle like morning thoughts. At doorways, diyas remember to be small suns in winter and monsoon. Government becomes more fingertip. A 12-digit idea, identity in numbers, meets payments on phones. Rickshaw fares ping. Grocery bills blink. A vegetable seller's QR placard shines in afternoon light. You remember the ledgers of company clerks and smile at how the same urge, to total, to tally, now moves at the speed of a tap. One more aside. Your thumb becomes so powerful that you consider putting it on your resume. Hard years come. A city holds its breath through attacks. A coastline counts the cost of waves. A virus walks up and down the land and asks every hospital, temple, and household, how will you hold each other? Vaccines arrive. Lines form. Pots of dal multiply in community kitchens. Balcony songs learn new notes. Historians still wonder what will last from those months. Remote work, masks as winter custom, gratitude as a daily exercise, or just better stockpiles of compassion. You hope for all four, with a bonus fifth: more naps for nurses. Democracy keeps its ordinary heroics. Every few years, the world's largest election gets up, stretches, and sets out again. Polling tents in tea gardens, at high passes, in river prisons, in schools smelling of chalk. Parties argue loudly. Voters answer quietly. Courts scold and shield. Journalists dig. Activists push their luck. Civil servants make the trains meet at noon. But arguments harden sometimes, and nights turn hot with words that forget neighbors are not adversaries. Historians still wonder whether the center of the republic is stronger than its loudest margins, whether pluralism will keep aging gracefully or need new glasses. You hold the worry, then breathe with the older rhythm: banyan shade, stepwell depth, the wheel turning. The earth itself asks for a hearing. Glaciers retreat, summers lengthen, coasts reconsider their beaches. Solar fields gleam. Windmills rehearse skywriting. Buses learn electric manners. Farmers demand fair prices. Cities ask for air fit for childhood. Rivers remember their beds and request space. You listen, and the subcontinent answers with a familiar habit: adjust, invent, endure, insist. It has done this in pottery and poetry, in code and cotton. It will try again in carbon and care. Remember the earliest seals we couldn't read, the Vedic chants we could, the epics under banyans, the iron roads of Section 5, the lion pillars of Section 6, Gupta numbers, monsoon routes, arches and domes, the inked finger, the spinning wheel? They are still here, not as museum pieces but as tools and talismans. The wheel sits in a flag and in a foundry and in a phone's progress circle. The banyan is parliament and panchayat and neighborhood WhatsApp group arguing about stray cows and potholes. The stepwell is a constitution where you descend for relief and return with duty. The epics are alive whenever a family votes against its own irritation in favor of another day together. Night gathers over a skyline of satellites and sparrows. A temple bell answers a train horn. A call to prayer plays tag with a pressure cooker's whistle. Someone strings marigolds across a doorway. Someone else laces up running shoes before dawn. The country you walk through is not a finish line but a practice, of debate without contempt, of growth without forgetting, of memory without malice. You turn toward sleep with a last, quiet joke. You meant to summarize India in one sentence, but India, kindly, summarized you. Let the noise fall away now, the speeches, the trains, the stadium lights, and let the map fold itself into something small enough to place by your pillow. Breathe in slowly, as if the night were a cool corridor of an old stepwell, each breath another worn stair, each exhale a brighter patch of moonwater below. The cities dim their windows one by one. The ports hush their ropes. The highways rest like quiet rivers that forgot, for a while, to move. You may keep a few gentle images with you: the purple crescent of election ink, a tiny medal on a fingertip, a diya breathing steadily on a threshold, a coconut's quick, bright crack before a rocket leans into the sky, a schoolyard where a chalk wheel turns beneath small hands. Hold them loosely. They know how to drift. Across the land, fans purr and curtains lift in a soft draft. Courtyards exhale jasmine and warm stone. Somewhere a night watchman taps his stick and wishes long life to the street. Far off, a temple drum tries one last heartbeat and decides tomorrow can finish the rhythm. A call from a minaret lingers like a silver thread. A church bell settles in its own echo. Even the old banyan seems to sway in sleep, roots and branches agreeing to meet again at morning. You have walked very far tonight, along rivers and among bricks, through chants and epics, across markets and oceans, under arches and beside pillars, past factories and gardens, into courtrooms and launch pads. Let that distance compress now into a warm, simple nearness, a blanket, a pillow, the steady company of your own breath. History can keep the watch. If a thought returns, Let it pass like a late train beyond your station. If a worry taps your shoulder, give it a number and a place in line for morning. And if a story insists on telling itself, let it lower its voice and hum. And now, you may drift into dreams of history. End of script. Sweet dreams.